own outcome of what you're doing on a daily basis. So this is the other point that I want to make. Every job is not to manage circumstances, it's to dominate the market. It's to create the own outcome of what you're doing on a daily basis. So this is the other point that I want to make. Every time we have a shift is basically an opportunity with an expiration date. You know, most opportunities lie within the issues, the problems. When you've got a shift in the market, we see it as something that's coming against our norm, our status quo. And the reality is, if we're seeing it through the right lens, there is always an opportunity in the midst of it. You know, I hate to admit it, but like she said, I was 18 when I came into this business. And I'm probably, that claim to fame, yes, it's been over 40 years that I've been in the business. But my real claim to fame is that I'm probably one of the few people that you'll ever meet in the real estate business whose age was equal to the interest rate at any given time in their career, right? I came in 1978. Is there anybody else out there still in after 1978, right? Anybody else? Well, the interest rate within that first year, did you say yes? Good for you. You and I can talk afterwards. We're bound to have something in common, right? You and me only. Right. But anyway, in looking at that, when that interest rate goes up to that, it taught me a couple of things, just what we said. The 18% interest rate taught me very early on, it's not about circumstances. There's someone making money at 18%. My job was to be in the right group. My job was to be making money, whether we were in the middle of interest rate increases, whether we were in the middle of a DOJ lawsuit settlement. It doesn't matter what it is, which group do you want to play with? That's what we're going to talk again about today. So let's go into that first industry shift, the DOJ versus the NAR lawsuit and the settlement of it. What I really want to again hit is, how do we give you some tools? We all understand it, but let's apply those 4 steps about interpreting the shift, defining its effect, right? And then being able to get ahead of it and owning the message. So if we look at this, and we're looking at it, interpreting this industry shift, I love this explanation or definition, to explain or tell something the meaning of, presenting it in understandable terms. Einstein supposedly said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it enough. So that's the first thing. We've got to have a common message that's out there. We've got 1 million+ realtors. Maybe there will be less of them next year, but it doesn't matter. This particular group is not the group that's going to lose them, right? It's not going to be a RE/MAX environment that's going to be losing the numbers. It's going to be individuals that didn't know what they were doing in the first place. So if we're going to look at this DOJ lawsuit, we have to understand it first and be able to explain it in terms that matter. Here's what I'm going to challenge you all on as one of your first levels of, so to speak, homework. There's so much out there, and what we need to hear is the truth, and we need to hear the perception. Because which one are you walking into when you're doing a listing or a sales presentation? Perception. So why wouldn't we want to know what they're hearing so that we can take the facts and the truth and apply them to the application of that presentation? So here's the challenge again. For now, 1 a day, you dig into that marketplace that's easy enough to find online and figure out how to read 1 article a day, 1 post a day that digs into the application of the DOJ lawsuit so that you become the expert. You can explain it in understandable terms. When you're listening to what they say, your mind picks up very quickly what was just true and what was just false. Second, this is probably one of the first things that I'd suggest you find. It's the NAR settlement fact sheet. It's out there, it's easy to read. Get yourself a copy of it. It's in the downloads today. So if you've taken a shot of the QR code, you should be able to pull that up. It's got 4 pages of information at that point that you should be able to click through. But look at some of this, and this is why it matters. Here's some of the things that were posted. Opens up consumer advocates and even some realtors hail NAR settlement. We've opened up the entire industry to competition. And they go on to just talk about what this application is going to be. How about this? You can hire an attorney for $1,500 instead of paying a $50,000 commission. Is that a deal? Right? Is that a deal? Is that what they're hearing right now? So define its effect. How is it affecting it? Let's talk about some of the things that I personally think is going to be presented to you when you walk into those appointments. Many consumers will be misinformed. Do you think that's true? Many of them are going to be misinformed, so be prepared with your facts and the truth. The value of your services will be challenged. Anybody got a yes to that? Come on, I know it's like 9:15, right? Are they going to challenge your value? And we've got to be prepared for it. See, the one thing that I love about being confident in what we do, believing that what we do on a daily basis has value, is that when somebody challenges it, we're not offended by it, we're ready to defend it. We have every right to walk in and say, understand, first of all, where'd you get your information from? Let's talk about what your sources are. And now let's talk about what the perception is and what the reality is of this settlement. Expect them to challenge your value and be ready. Next, stronger and more effective buyer counseling presentations must be developed that deliver an effective cost, feature, benefit breakdown of the buyer-agency relationship. We've all heard that. We all know it, but how would you all like at least some kind of a suggestion of what that new buyer counseling session should look like? Anybody want one, something like that? Okay, I'm gonna give you my idea. It doesn't make it perfect, it doesn't make it right, but in a lot of cases, it's better than what most people have right now. And the interesting thing for me is this, and this is what I find. We go back to that opportunity with an expiration date. See, our job, I really believe so strongly that our job is to be the early adopter. The quicker we adopt to the situation that we find ourselves in, the better we're going to be prepared to be able to deliver this information. And if an industry is an early adopter, and keeping in mind that really an early adopter is usually the person who really believes in the product. Isn't that interesting? See, if we have an industry that lags behind and becomes the late adopters, then that says something about the industry. And if there's any company out there that I really believe should be prepared to be the early adopter, it should be RE/MAX. If you're an early adopter, you believe in the product. You believe that what we do every day is valuable and you're prepared for that. So getting into that and doing these kind of things is what's going to matter. Now, not last, but listing agents must revise or update their listing presentations with an intentional focus on reinforcing the value of compensating a selling agent. Intentional. Sitting down and saying, when I go have that conversation with this seller, it's my job to prove the value of the agent on the other side. How many of you all believe that? Right? Because guess what? If we don't believe it, we've got another issue. We'll talk about that in just a second. How many of y'all remember this term? I bet you remember it, Trudy. Commissionectomies? Remember? We used to have a saying a long time ago that would say, did you do a commissionectomy? Which was when you went to closing and you took your commission, you sliced and diced it until there was nothing left on the table. And I think we're going to find, I think you have to be prepared for this. In fact, we were talking about it just the other day, Trudy, that she was in a scenario. Is it okay if I mention that? That she was in a scenario the other day. We were getting ready to go into a presentation. She came in a little bit late and she said, I've been in the middle of a six contract multiple offer. And one of the offers is obviously got an edge because the agent did what? What'd they do? A commissionectomy, right? They took their value, and I'm not saying, keep in mind, I'm not being holier than thou. There are times when giving up that portion of your commission may be appropriate, but it should be our exception and not our rule. It should be what we've done to help in that transaction, not to be our business model. And that's what's going to happen to a lot of people out there. They're going to have a business model of reducing their value to make something work. Okay? All right, the get ahead of it. So those are just some, and I'm sure if we sat down here and had 2 hours, we could sit and brainstorm and figure out what the other ones look like. But here's what I know. If I understand and interpret it, if I define its effect, then if I know how it's going to affect my business, I should be now figuring out what I'm going to do in order to address every issue that I think is going to affect the business I'm doing. And that's where getting ahead of it's going to come in. How many of y'all know who this one is? Yell it out at me. There you go. Wayne Gretzky. And he said, or at least supposedly said, when he was asked, how are you so successful, so consistently successful on the ice? And he said, that's easy. I skate to where the puck is what? Going. I skate to where the puck is going to be. Getting ahead of it is exactly what we're talking about. Okay, I know what my issue is. Now let me skate to where the puck is going to be. And see, they gave us a gift. We've got April and May and June. We've got 90 days before this goes into effect to skate to where the puck is going to be, to figure out what needs to be done, do it, get ahead of it, and be prepared on July 1 because we're early adopters. Okay? Oops, got that one. Oh, coming back to this for one second. Listing Agents Revisor update. Remember this one for the intentional focus. Now, you know, I'm not proud. There's a lot of people out there that you all watch, I watch, that I think, gosh, you did a darn good job. How many of y'all know David Knox? Right? David Knox does a great job. And I watched him he has 2 videos that are up. Make sure you note them. One of them is the 5 benefits of a buyer's agent, and then he comes right behind it with the DOJ settlement and says, based on that DOJ settlement, let's talk about some of the revisions that I would make to the information that I'm sharing with you today. And he goes into the presentation that a listing agent would be making to their seller in order to be prepared for, you know, business as usual, so to speak. He goes through that checklist of what that listing presentation should look like and puts it into very easy, understandable terms. But I want to drill down even further. I want to make it even more easily understandable. It's this simple, guys. Number 1, do you know today what the ratio of co-broker sales are that occurred in your MLS in 2023? Could you spout it out today? Because you best be able to spout it out 90 days from now. You better be able to spout it out more, quicker than that. Because what does the co-broker sales ratio tell us about the value of two people in the transaction? If it's happening 82% of the time, if it's happening 87% of the time, is the market telling you very clearly that when you put a listing on the market, it benefits the seller to what? Offer compensation to a buyer's agent in order to best represent who? Our seller, our client. And this is, I'm going to drill even further to this, because this is what we really have to decide. Were they right? See, when they said, oh, you poor consumer, you've been abused by all these horrible people that are taking advantage of the money that's coming to the table. When they said that, were they right? Or do we walk in the door every day and sit down with that seller and say to that seller, here's what I need in order to compensate the agent on the other side because it's a benefit to you? Or were they right? Or do we walk in and benefit us and say, I think I'll take care of my friend Susan so that when she shows this house, she gets paid? The truth is the opposite. If we weren't concerned about taking care of our seller, wouldn't it be easier to say, I won't offer something on the other side because that will drive the person to who? The listing agent. And if the listing agent is the only one accumulating individuals, is there the chance it eliminates and reduces the possibility of multiple offers? Or any offer. Thank you very much. Were they right? See, if we answer that question and say, no, they weren't, then every one of us should be in a situation that we're digging into that listing presentation and making sure that we are fine-tuning that presentation to drive home the co-broker sales ratio in our area, the value of that other agent, what that agent is going to do for you, our personal set of circumstances where we can show that having the multiple offer and the multiple offers and the experience on the other side made a difference. If they are wrong, this is nothing but truth. And you know the one thing I always found about truth? It's easy to defend. Isn't it? Truth is easy to defend. All right. How many of y'all have seen this kind of thing? You know, this is what it came to mind when I thought about what's going on. How many of y'all have seen the neighborhoods that used to be kind of connected? Like you used to be able to walk across the street to that house, and all of a sudden you can see that the development of highways kind of cut right through the neighborhood, right? You seen it in different places? Well, this is what my mind sees when we talk about where we are right now. You've got two things that we're dealing with when it comes to this next part, which is going to be really talking about the buyer side of this DOJ settlement. It was at one time that, you know, when life as we've known it, that payment and services were connected. It was an easy transition, wasn't it? We sat down with the individuals, we knew what we were going to say, we knew what our options were, we knew we could sit and work with them, and we knew that the payment for our services pretty much flowed. And then the DOJ settlement ran through the middle of our lives, right? And totally disconnected those two items. Payment and services have become very disconnected. So here's what I want to throw out today. And I need to say it with this. If this form is on your downloads, but I've got a caveat on it, and it is this. This is a rough draft form. We talk about early adopters, right? Early adopters don't get it perfect. In fact, some early adopters go buy a product that in its infancy, by the time it comes into 3 or 4 iterations later, is much better than the first one they bought. And so we're talking about here in terms of doing this form that I'm providing to you today. This is something that's been written in the last week saying we got to get ahead of this. We need a tool. We need something that is going to order this process in a way that we can make sense of it, sit down, and dominate the presentation. I didn't say manipulate. I said dominate, right? Be able to be the trusted advisor and lead them through the process, especially all the changes that we're experiencing. So it is an estimated buyer contributions to purchase form. What are the 3 areas, basic areas of contribution that the buyer is going to need to make in order to put this transaction together? And again, when you get it, it's going to say rough draft, don't use, nobody gets to sue me, right? It says do not use without broker and legal review. I just want to make sure that we know it's to share what we know and what we do. See, again, I think what I'm so proud of after all these years, almost to the point I don't even know why, I feel almost choked up right now. I've been doing this for 44 years, full-time every day of my life. I'm proud of what we do. I'm proud of who we are. And the idea that people choose to take what we do every day and reduce it to manipulation and abuse is so offensive. And so we take this, right? So I want to take this and throw it out there and say, make it better. Take it and massage it. Tell me what worked better. Figure out the dialogues that you think are going to make this and apply it to something that's going to do better for you on a daily basis. But let's make sure that we're starting to put these tools together. So here are again these 3 areas, 3 categories. The first one is going to be the down payment. John and Mary need a down payment. Let's figure out what that money is going to be. The second category is going to be their closing costs and prepaids. What is that going to turn out to be? Now, keeping in mind, this is the form, it's not the dialogue, it's not the process. This is the form that we're going to go through, and then the buyer agent compensation fee. Now here's the difference. I look at this, and by the time we total those 3 things up, we got a number at the bottom, right? Is that number bigger than most buyers are prepared for when it comes to buying a house? And see, before we had an easy answer for that. Today we don't. there's no shortcut through this process. It's now going to take talent. It's going to take experience. It's going to take reality and knowledge and commitment to sit down and go through these things and show our value while we're educating our buyer. So in looking at this, again, if the first one was, here's our down payment, our first contribution, the buyer has or will have the above referenced down payment for the purchase. Now I'm talking the whole time, but as I get through this, I want them to give me some authorization. So John Mary, do you feel like this is something that you can do? Yes. Okay, let's just check that one off. Next, closing costs. This is what it comes down to. Estimated. This is about what we're looking at. Based on this, where do you think you are when it comes to closing costs? And look at the one. They don't have the funds or have limited funds available for closing costs and require assistance through either financing or properties where sellers' concessions towards buyers' closing costs at settlement are available. Now, I know there's already this little thing in my head that says, okay, I need to make sure I'm not getting myself in a box where they say, show me the houses that have concessions, because first of all, I want their permission to eliminate. Their permission to eliminate, not my permission. You're not going to hang it on me that I took something off the table. I'm taking it off the table because they've made it clear they can't afford to do that, though there's other solutions. And there's another thing that I'm going to share with you in just a second. And then last, when we talk about where are we going to get this from, that's one of the next conversations. The third is going to be their buyer compensation fee, whatever that has to be. And lastly, the same thing, that they're authorizing us to show them properties where this seller has indicated. Now, I know that part of our problem is how well does that agent communicate on the other side? Am I right? You're trying to reach the listing agent, the house is on fire, you can't get somebody to even tell you. I know there's a gap here between, okay, I want to make sure I've got their permission not to show them something they can't afford, but what if the seller will write and accept something that I write into the contract for concessions? But at least it's starting the conversation, okay? When it comes to this valuation scenario, and we're having now to come and justify this, which is part of this last bit of conversation, when we have to justify the value, and I didn't say pay for ourselves, I said justify. See, to me, justifying our compensation means we're worth it. Why are we worth it? What are we bringing to the table that makes your service is worth it? If I walk into a doctor's office and I have all kinds of stuff done and that bill comes and it's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, if that individual is doing what I need them to do, can I justify that expense? I may not like it, can I justify it? And that's what we're talking about here. How do I justify this? Well, first of all, if you're on the seller side, these are in, I think there's a slide, there is a download slide that shows you. This is an NAR document with 179 ways that a listing agent brings their value to the table. The buyers is 105 more ways, so it gives you the ability to look through it. I've never been real big on this 105 things that I'm going to do because I think some of it's just kind of a watered down version. But I do think you could go through that thing and say, let me highlight this, and let me highlight this, and let me highlight this. Let me make sure that these are the things that I am hitting on, that I bring value to the table. Because these are the pages that you have the ability to download and print. All right, so we're back to this. Okay, we're negotiating this particular fee. There's two reasons for it. Number one, the DOJ settlement requires, John and Mary, that we have a conversation about this because these are the two big factors that came out of DOJ. They require me to have a written representation agreement with you. So I want to make sure that we have a very clear understanding of what that's going to mean. And secondly, the MLS, the compensation, offer of compensation may no longer be communicated in the MLS system. So we have to make arrangements for how this will be settled. And I want to make sure we've had that conversation now, not later when you find the home of your dreams and you're under stress. That's not the time to be talking about this. Okay? Now, in addition to that and owning the message, how are you now communicating this to everybody? Keeping in mind, again, their job is hype. And when I look at some of the things, here's some of the things that, again, settlement expenses are expected to lower prices. Do you think that's going to happen? There may be some other factors that lower prices, but it's not going to be settlement expenses. I've never seen a seller that said, if I'm not paying you, please send it to the local charity, right? Whatever the money is that I save, go ahead and reduce the price accordingly. That's not what's happening normally. How about realtors are nervous? It could be the worst thing ever. We're nervous. You know why we're nervous? Because individuals that have never done our job have stepped into our lane and told people that our value is not appropriate. That's why we're nervous, because people that don't know what we do on a daily basis have made laws that require us to search for ways to be paid. Crazy mess. All right. After a $1.8 billion verdict, the clock is ticking on the 6% real estate commission. Really? That's an interesting one because, again, commissions have always been negotiable. And I guarantee you we've got 8,200 different stories. Well, actually, we've got maybe 300, not that many in the room, of different ways that we have been paid at this point. Home sellers win $1.8 billion after jury finds conspiracy among realtors. This is what they're reading, guys. And the interesting thing is, did you know the home sellers were getting that $1.8 billion? Right? Right. All right, our job is reality. Reading this NAR fact sheet. Now here's again the buyer counseling session. I just want to share this with you because this is what I see to be the possibility. This is in your downloads, but this is what I believe to be another iteration of a buyer counseling appointment. That you've got to first of all walk in the door and hit it on the head. What do they know about the DOJ settlement? Are they highly informed and therefore you've got to deal with perception and deliver truth and reality? Or are they not highly familiar and maybe we're going to get to it because we have to, but maybe we're going to lead at that point with the value proposition of why you want me and why my hyperlocal specialty is going to make a difference. Next, review a buyer's contributions to the purchase. You're going to go through the form, and that form is going to lead to different things. For example, if we're talking about the 3 categories, it'll bring up my buyer services, why I'm of value. The buyer representation agreement, as it brings in and we talk about the idea that you're going to pay somebody for services. And then the above may create a listing agent discussion. Do you think that's possible? Think about this. I'm going through my cost. We're talking about the fee. They don't have it. What do you think they're thinking? Somebody yelling at me. Do I call the listing agent? Right? And again, we have a no fear conversation. If that's their objection, what's your answer? And so when we look at this, if it leads to a listing agent discussion, well, what if well, let's talk about that. And is there a conversation that's necessary if your state allows dual agency? Should they understand dual agency? Should they understand what that means when one person represents both parties? And what if it's not allowed? Should they understand the no representation? We call it customer relationship. Should they understand what that means and what they're giving up? To lead them back to the idea that you're bringing value to the conversation. And I'm going to give you a little bit more to that as well. And then lastly, your hyperlocal expertise. When I talked about this, here's what I know. If you tell me on 1 you've got it, and you tell me on 2 you don't, and you tell me on 3 you don't, every time they eliminate what they have to work with, do you become more valuable or less valuable? Think about that. I've got 1, but I don't have 2 and 3. Do you become, as a buyer's agent, more valuable or less valuable? More valuable. And here's why I think that. Well, John, Mary, based on what we've talked about, here's what I know. In order for me to help you find the home of your dreams, especially in a fast-moving market, then I'm going to need to concentrate not only on houses that are on the market, but houses that are what? Off market. And so you've gotten your download of finding unlisted inventory in any market guideline sheet that gives you 7 or 8 ways to drill into your market and figure out how to find properties. I can tell you there's a product that I've been using and I'm trying to figure out if it's worth it. At this point, I put 2 of my buyers into it that I talked to over the last 2 weeks. It's called Celebrity Agent. I don't get anything from them. But what it is a product that I can put my buyer on the phone and say, we're looking for properties in this area. Let's run the data. They bring up the map. They have a data scrub that's behind the scenes that says, go ahead and plug in everything we do. And as they do it, they show them how the numbers are going down. It's similar to what obviously you're seeing on an MLS, but this is really data scrubbed. And they say, based on exactly what you want, drilling into this area, there's 450 houses, we'll do the mailing, and the letter goes out from the buyer subject to me. We'll see if it works. But I can tell you I've had 2 buyers very impressed. It ain't cheap. Is it something, would I rather put money into that than lead generation right now? Is that where I'd rather spend the money to be able to sit down and say, you need me more than you've ever needed me. Let's talk about how I'm going to bring value to this relationship. If you need assistance with closing costs and you need assistance with your buyer representation fee, right? Do you think you need to be pretty darn good at negotiations if you've got to help somebody get into a house that needs assistance with closing cost and with their buyer compensation fee, right? They need us. Last, here on this particular thing, I have sat down and just wore myself out thinking, what would be some of the conversations that I would have with them? What am I going to talk to somebody about why I'm bringing value? You know, when we talk about number 3, let me share an analogy with you. For example, someone came into my office last week, $350,000. If I know it, if the loan officer supports it, am I going to go show that person $450,000 homes? Would you all? Right? No. And we don't because it's unprofessional. It would be unfair to the people that we represent. So the truth is now, is it as important to know the money they have available, the funds necessary to get into that house? Is that as much a qualifier as what house they qualify for, right? And so, John and Mary, it would be just as much of a disservice. I would be doing just as much, in regards to my quality of service if I didn't take the time now to walk through the funds that are going to be necessary to make this closing or this sale happen for you. So this is actually to your benefit that I'll understand your negotiating position long before we need to know it. But that's what a lot of these dialogues are, and they're all in there to download at this point. All right, interpret the market. So are y'all ready to leave that behind? Come on. Oh my gosh. Okay, second thing. We're going to interpret the market shift. Oh, good, and I've got do I have 24 minutes left? That's a good sign. On interpreting the market shift, we're going to go from interpreting the industry shift to interpreting the market shift. And that's what this originally was about. So we still have a good half hour to talk about this. This is when that market is out there shifting on a regular basis and you're trying to figure out who's in control, where do I take this, what happens next, how do I negotiate with my buyer or my seller? And we have started in our company, we have a monthly economic factors course. And in that economic factors course, we take the MLS stats, we analyze them, and we build them into a program that the agents will take and assess to figure out where the market's going. Remember we talked about Wayne Gretzky, who was going to do what? Skate to what? Where the market's going to be. So when we're talking about, walking in and talking with the buyer or the seller, wouldn't we want to know where the market's going to if we're talking to the seller, not where the market is at the moment? Where is it going to be 30 days from now? At that point, 30 days from now, what should I be doing? Should I be more aggressive or less aggressive when it comes to pricing? What does the market tell me? That's what we're going to talk about right now. It's such an interesting study. And here's the really interesting thing. It basically takes the assessment of 2 factors in the MLS, in your MLS data, which is going to be listings taken year to date for whatever that time frame is. So it might be if I'm going in and we're doing one for, we're almost at the end of March. So our thing comes out about the 10th of April. So I'm going to do a study at that point. We as a group will be doing a study from January 1 of 2024 through March 31st of 2024. How many listings were taken? Not the status of the listing, the number of listings. I'm not worried at that moment about what is it. Is it active, pending, sold, expired? How many were taken? And then we're going to compare that to the number of sales that occurred, closed sales that occurred in the exact same period of time. And we're going to build a relationship between those two numbers, which we do. And the truth is, Cynthia, how long have we been tracking this stuff? For 10 years, 15 years? I mean, it goes all the way back to every month, almost for a 10, 15-year period, we've been watching the market and graphing it. And it is amazing that that graph, if you look back, is reading exactly where the market was and where it went. It's very interesting. So here's what we're talking about. Again, remembering this, if we're talking about interpreting the market shift, and you're going to communicate that to a buyer or seller, and we can't drill it down to something that says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it enough. Here's the bottom line for knowing what a market is doing. It's the relationship between supply and demand. It always is. Always is. It's that simple. What's the relationship of supply, which are listings, in comparison to the relationship of demand, which are sales? And so if we look at this, you've got to know your numbers. So here's what I'm usually looking at. The market's going to pretty much be in one of three stages, either market expansion or increase, which have we seen that for almost a 10, 11-year run? Anybody agree? It was doing this for what, about 10 years. And in fact, what's really interesting is what I have found is one of the reasons why some of the market shifting was a little bit harder on even the experienced agents is because we had people in the business that had been in the business for 10 years and never knew a different market. Now think about that. It's like, wait a minute, what I know to be my norm has changed. So we're either dealing with market expansion, and that's usually going to look like this. The inventory is going to be decreasing, sales are increasing. That's pretty simple. But remember, if you can't explain it simply, you just don't know it well enough. That's what market expansion looks like. Sales or listings are going down, sales are going up. Next is going to be market retraction. And when we were going through all of this about a year ago, when we were having all the issues with interest rates and just kind of throwing the market into quite a loop, I found that agents were confused between whether the market was in retraction or whether it was in transition. And those are your two markets. So you've got market expansion, which is that seller's market going strong. Then you've got market retraction, which looks, well, I'll show you that in just a second. Market retraction is going to be going the opposite way. It's when it's a buyer's market. And market in transition is sitting right there in the middle, wondering what it is. It's a schizophrenic market, right? And there's a word that we can associate that with that. But there are 4 stages of market shift. And if you're studying those and you're looking at them, they're giving you an indication of if you're in transition, where you are in that process. And so you're talking about, if you're talking about retraction, then you're going to have inventory increasing, you're going to have sales decreasing, and those two factors are then going to make the days on market increase, and that factor is going to start to make what? Decrease. Yell it at me so I know you're looking. Prices. Okay. So inventory increasing, sales decreasing, the days on market expanding at that point, and prices decreasing. When you have all 4 of those factors, your market's in retraction. And the one thing that I remember clearly about market in retraction is if your market is truly retracting, then you've got the chance of what they call chasing the market down. Anybody know that term? Right? If you've been around for long enough, you know. It really means that you've got the peak. The last price that occurred in the market cannot be your list price. In a market that's in retraction, if you're not going to chase the market down, you cannot make your list price the last price. You're always chasing behind it. you need a reduction, and then you take the reduction, you started too high to start with, and so you're always chasing it down. That's what that truly is. That's going to be your market in retraction. And again, that looks like that. You've got listings going up, and you've got sales going down. That's a true buyer's market. A market in transition is when one of those four things is not happening, and it could be more than one. How many of y'all have had that experience for like the last year or two? Truly? Wave at me if you know that you've had those, there's something in those four that are not happening. How many of y'all have not for a long time had inventory increasing? Anybody? Right? So we all have one factor already that we can say, if inventory is not increasing, then we're surely not in retraction right now. And so we've got inventory increasing or sales decreasing. Usually one or the other of those two is not happening. So in looking at this, I just wanted to share this with you, and I just grabbed one because it was, a good one to show you from what we do on a monthly basis. This was last July, that showed that when we pulled up our numbers year to date, our listings were off by 20%, 21% in our marketplace. Obviously, the first factor in the four stages is not occurring. We don't have listing inventory increasing. It tells me immediately there's a factor going on underlying my market that is creating a market in transition. And the reason that's important is we're going to deal with the terminology for that in a minute. And then we've got sales decreasing. Well, you go look, and in the same month, did I have sales decreasing? Yes or no? Wait a minute. There's a different answer. Yes, right? We had sales, we had listings decreasing by about 20%. We had listings decreasing by about 20%. So we have two things happening at the same time in the same direction. And when that happens, when the arrows are both going the same way, that's called a market in transition. Remember about if you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. All I had to do was look and say, I've got listings going down at the same time I've got sales going down. Now, what do you think, if you had to choose a word, what do you think that feels like for the market, for the consumer, for the agent, when both are happening at the same time when you're in transition? Confusion. Expect it. Remember we talked about when they challenge your value? Expect it. When you've got a market in transition, expect to walk in and have the seller say, I don't get this. Why am I not getting multiple offers like my friend did, down the road? They got 22 offers on their house. Why am I not getting it? When the listings, or when I read an article yesterday, or I heard a news report that said that inventory is dramatically decreasing. Inventory decreasing is supposed to be to the benefit of the seller. And then you have a buyer show up, and the buyer says, well, I don't get it. Why can't I write an offer on a house without going up against multiple offers? Because the article that I read said the buyer pools are decreasing. There's a confusion that will always be present when you're in a market in transition. Expect it. Be prepared to talk about it. All right, here's the other thing. When we look at if listings are off by 20.9% and sales are off by 20.1%, here's another factor we look at. Your mind says, okay, well, they're both off about the same amount. So we're waiting to see what's going to flip. It kind of indicates if I've got listings off by 20 and I've got sales off by 20, aren't we close to something flipping? Because the interesting thing about a market in transition is you're sooner or later going to flip. It's going to flip. Is it going to take a month? Is it going to take 2 years? Sooner or later, one's giving up. One's going to go the opposite direction. God bless you. But the interesting thing here is numbers lie to us. It messes with your mind. I've got listings off by 20%. I've got sales off by 20%. Shouldn't the market be close to doing something different? But how many of y'all have played musical chairs before? Remember that game? Because you have to apply the principle of musical chairs to the numbers I just gave you. You see, if I've got, let's just say, 100 listings, and they're off by 20%. If I've got 20% less listings today than I did a year ago, and I had 100, how many do I have now? 80, right? Now, would you say that it's probably fair to say, last year I had 100 listings and I also had 400 buyers? Is that fair? That the relationship has always been for the last couple of years. We've continued to be extremely low on inventory. So even if you have buyers off by 20% and listings off by 20%, then I'm down to 80 listings, and if you take 20% off of 400 buyers, how many do I have? 320. So in the process of musical chairs, even though the numbers look the same, and see, the reason that matters is because the news will pick it up. Listings are off by 20%, right? Buyer pools are off by 20%, and the person reading that says, oh, if buyer pools are off by 20, then it's time for a deal. And the truth is, if you don't know your numbers and you can't look and explain the whole musical chair concept, then what you end up with is somebody thinking that matters. And the truth is, it is off by 20, but we still have 320 people fighting for 80 listings. I worked it one day to figure it out. It took almost a 42% decrease in sales production for it to come close to flipping the relationship. Not 20% off and 20, it was a 42% difference between them in order to flip, because our inventory is so low. All right, here's where we just ended. The end of February, this is our last one. We saw sales going up by, or excuse me, listings going up by 10%, and sales were off by 7%. So again, we look at that and go, oh, well, you know, things are improving for the buyers at this point. We've got listings starting to climb. We've got sales that are off. But the one thing that I want you to be thinking about here, and again, let's go back to this. When you look at it and you just do it, you just do it by arrows. Listings are up, sales are down. If we just follow the arrows, it tells me that's a buyer's market. Listings are going up, sales are going down. But we know clearly it's not. So what else do we drill into at that point? And you all have a copy of these forms in your downloads, so if you wanted to take them and plug them into your MLS stats, you're welcome to do that. We can usually do this study in about a half hour a month. That's about what it takes. Plug it in, follow it, track it. And in this case, even though sales are off by less than 1% and listings are up by 1, the absorption ratio, which is not the absorption rate, the number of months necessary to clear, the inventory, we're not talking about that. We're talking about something we call the absorption ratio, which is take the sales, divide them into the listing, and what ratio do you have? In this case, 63% of what's been on the market approximately has been sold, is being absorbed. About 65% of the market is still being absorbed. And over the years, what we have found is that as long as we stay above the 55-60% line, as long as we're above that, it remains a seller's market. Now you can see back here, 2006, 7, and 8, what was so interesting, think about that. In 6 and 7, we didn't realize it. It was in our stats. Prices were flatlining. Listings were flatlining. We were getting flatlining for 2 years, but there was so much activity going on. How many of y'all remember Brian Buffini talking about that yesterday? We were, so fat and happy that we didn't notice what was happening. And the same thing happened there, but as soon as we crossed through that demilitarized zone, that yellow space, that tells you you're in a process of something shifting. That yellow space is basically a market in transition. And so as it started to enter into it, it told us, is this going to be a double dip? Is it going to flip back and go the opposite direction? Is this a fluke? Or is it going to continue down at this point and ultimately change the market? And you can see where the market shifted and changed in 9, 10, 11, and started to come up about 12. That's the graphing I was telling you about that came from nothing but tracking these two numbers. And look how legitimate that market read is. Here's where we are all the way on the other side. We're sitting right above the 60% line. So we're watching closely. Do we keep transitioning? And if we move into the yellow, we're starting to get closer and closer to one of those things flipping one way or the other and telling us whether we're going into transition. It's very possible to ride that line for a year or two and nothing change other than the stabilizing of the market. And just remember that, again, you have to remember that that market in transition is what's going to create confusion. Okay? So if we're talking about defining its effect, once you know this, and if you're reading this stuff on a regular basis, one of the things that I want the agents to be able to do is to take what they know and think like the business owner. There are things that are affected based on where the market's going. How are you both in the industry shift and the market shift? You need to ask yourself these questions. I'll encourage team leaders, like in late October when they should be doing business planning, to sit down with these questions and take a day, separate themselves from everything and start asking themselves in 2020, let's just say coming up, they're sitting in October of 2024. In 2025, how does the current industry position and how does the current market position affect what I'm going to do when it comes to my client relationships and my communication, my presentations, my pricing strategies? You start to think ahead, skate to where the puck's going to be physically in this quarter and mentally in next at all times. That's what's going to make the difference in your business. Okay? And again, getting ahead of it, if again we're thinking, how do dialogues change? How many of y'all have heard this? Anybody in here, or is it just me? I think we're going to wait. Well, again, if you're looking at your numbers, is that decision based on perception or is it based on reality? Are they reading all the posts that are talking about the shrinking buyer markets? And is that starting to change? Anybody feeling that? It's starting to change. Okay, let's talk about that for a few minutes, John and Mary. So I have a really good understanding of where you are and what you want to accomplish. How did you come to the decision to wait? Do you have certain sources that you've read or you watch, or has anything happened recently that brought you to this conclusion? Tell me more. It's never about defending. It's always about understanding. Okay, I heard what you said. Now let's talk for a minute. How did you come to that conclusion? Tell me what you heard. What's brought you to that decision? Okay, where are our dialogues? And then owning the message. How are we going to end up communicating all of this? It's such a great time to have so much information out there that we can start saying, they've got perception, we have truth. What's the truth that needs to be communicated at this point? When it comes to the industry and my relationship with you, when it comes to the market and my relationship with it, what do I need to be doing that will change this? And I love this statement. You can avoid reality, but you can't avoid the consequences of avoiding reality, right? We've got a lot in front of us, a huge amount in front of us. And see, the interesting thing is when I think about what Brian Buffini said yesterday, did he say in the next 2 years sales were going up or down? What was it? Up. And then he referred to an economist that he liked. And did that economist say that listings were going up or down? Did he say inventory was increasing or not? He said yes. So let's go back to what we talked about today. If we get nothing more than this, we've got an economist saying inventory is going up. We've got Brian Buffini's study saying sales are going up. What is one word that's related to the direction of the market they just predicted? What's the word you got today? Come on. Up, yes, but did we say a market going in the same direction? Inventory going up, sales going up is a market in transition, and a market in transition is related to what word? Confusion. Oh, wow. So let's think of what this really means for us in the next 6 months to a year. We've got the market indicating that it will be doing something that will cause confusion for the buyer. And then we have an industry that's indicating that what they've done is going to cause confusion for the buyer. So what is in front of us? Confusion, right? Here's the reality of it. Again, if you're good at what you do, it's nothing but another day at work. That's what this is all about. This group is the best group that's out there. This is the group that's paid the price to be in this business. And if you've got a market coming at you where the industry has created confusion and the market will cause it to be you're more necessary and more valuable than you've ever been. So I want you to look at the person next to you. I want you to give them a high five and say, you rock for being the agent you are. Go ahead. And y'all, that's enough for today. I know we covered a lot of ground in a 1 hour period of time, but I want to thank you for being who you are. I want to thank you for the privilege of being in front of you for the last hour. I'd invite you to come see me for one this afternoon that's called Boundaries, Balance, and Well-Being. It's a totally different set of circumstances. This was cerebral today. This afternoon is more from the heart. One's a head, one's a heart. So it was such a pleasure to see you all today. We'll put the screen back up on the QR code. Have a great day here today.